All right, today we are diving deep into a fascinating and complex theory from our source material. It's one of those ideas that tries to connect pretty much everything. We're talking the Illuminati, the War on Terror, even the rise of AI. It's a story about secret societies, ancient prophecies, and a meticulously crafted plan for a new world order. So let's get into it.
Now, that phrase, according to the theory we're exploring, that's not just some old saying. No, it's the literal destination. It's the endpoint of a plan that's been in motion for centuries, aiming to establish a brand new world order with Jerusalem right at its very center. So here's how we're going to break this down. We're actually going to start at the end, with the theory's ultimate goal, this idea of a Pax Judaica. Then we'll work our way backward. We'll look at the secret alliances that supposedly put this all in motion, the ancient prophecies they're using as a playbook, how this theory claims to explain what's happening in the world right now, and finally, what it predicts is coming next.
Okay, let's start with the heart of this entire narrative, a concept called Pax Judaica.
So what is it? Well, this is the theory's big endgame. It's a vision of the future where all global power, financial, military, technological, is controlled from Jerusalem. And a key detail here, the theory claims this Jewish peace isn't actually run by the Jewish people, but by a hidden alliance of elites. This idea is the central hub that connects every other piece of the story.
So how does a theory like this even try to prove itself? Well, the source material has this clever framework it calls the 3 tests of truth. And you can see why this is so effective, right? It claims that any true theory must be able to connect the dots of the past, make sense of the chaos of the present, and accurately predict the future. It creates this powerful internal logic, so we're going to use their own framework to break it all down.
Right, so if Pax Judaica is the destination, who's driving the car? Well, the theory points to a powerful and very secret alliance that supposedly got the ball rolling centuries ago.
So the story goes, you get these 3 heavy hitters together back in the 18th century. First, there's Jacob Frank, a pretty controversial religious leader who had this massive cult-like following. He supposedly meets up with Meyer Rothschild, the guy who started a global banking empire. Rothschild then introduces Frank to Adam Weishaupt, a former Jesuit and a master strategist. In 1776, the theory claims, these 3 formed a new group to make their vision a reality, the Illuminati.
So what was the Illuminati's job in all this? Well, according to this theory, it wasn't about ruling from the front. Nope. Their whole game was infiltration. They were designed to get inside other powerful groups, especially the Freemasons, which were already full of Europe's elite, and slowly steer them toward this one unified long-term goal.
And this is how they supposedly kept it all under wraps. You've got this 3-tiered system. At the very top, a tiny, secret core, what the theory calls the 13 families, who are the true architects. In the middle, you have your ambitious middle management, people chosen because they're willing to do what it takes for power and influence. And then at the bottom, you have the vast majority of members, who are totally in the dark about the real agenda and think they're part of a club for good causes. So you might be asking, how on earth do you coordinate a secret plan across different groups for hundreds of years? The answer, according to this theory, is eschatology, the study of the end times. The idea is that these ancient prophecies act like a shared script, a common blueprint that all these groups can follow, even if their ultimate reasons for doing so are completely different.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, because you have all these different groups with their own ideas about the end of the world. First, you have the traditional Jewish view, which expects a Messiah and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Then you've got the Frankists, who believed you could actually force the end times to happen faster by creating chaos. On another track, Christian Zionists see this whole Jewish messianic age as the necessary reign of the Antichrist before Jesus can return. And finally, the Freemasons, who the theory says have a totally secular goal, to become gods themselves through technology. Now, this is the most important part. The motivations are totally different, but the theory says they all need 2 key things to happen. The Jewish people have to return to Israel, and Solomon's temple has to be rebuilt in Jerusalem.
And for the Freemasons, the theory says they have their own special checklist to prove they've basically become gods. First up, warp reality itself. They supposedly check that box with the invention of the atomic bomb. Next, kill a king, a divinely appointed ruler. They say that was fulfilled with the assassination of JFK. And the last one, the big finale, create life itself, a true sentient artificial intelligence.
And this is where it gets kind of spooky, geographically speaking. The number 33, right? It's a huge deal in Freemasonry. Well, the source points out something pretty wild. The Trinity site, where the first atomic bomb was tested, Hiroshima, where it was used, in Dallas, Texas, where JFK was killed, they all sit right around the 33rd parallel north.
And where do they predict the final act, creating AI, is going to happen? You guessed it, Jerusalem, also on the 33rd parallel.
Okay, so that brings us to their second test of truth, explaining the present. How does all this ancient history and prophecy supposedly connect to what's happening in the world right now, today?
Let's take a huge event from our lifetimes, the War on Terror. After 9/11, why did the US invade countries that had, nothing to do with the attacks?
Well, the theory's answer is that it was never really about terror. The real goal was to tear up the Middle East, to systematically take out any country that could pose a regional threat to Israel. The whole point was to pave the way for something called the Greater Israel Project, making Israel the undisputed top dog in the region. This is presented as a critical step on the road to Pax Judaica.
Okay, here's another thing we're seeing today. Why is there this frightening surge in anti-Semitism all over the world?
Now, this is where the logic gets really dark and twisted. The source argues this isn't some random, tragic trend. It's actually part of the plan. The theorized goal is to make life so difficult and unsafe for Jewish people living outside of Israel that they feel forced to move there. Why? Because that fulfills a key part of the prophecy, the ingathering of the exiles, that has to happen before the whole endgame can kick off.
And what about Silicon Valley? You and I see it as the place that gave us smartphones and social media, right? A center of innovation. But this theory paints a much, much darker picture. It claims the real goal isn't to connect us or sell us gadgets, but to build the nuts and bolts for a global AI-powered surveillance state. We're talking about the data centers, the networks, the digital IDs, the literal architecture for what prophecy calls the mark of the beast.
And that brings us to the third and final test of truth, predicting the future. If this whole framework is correct, what does the source say is just around the corner?
Well, it predicts a wave of escalating chaos, all specifically designed to bring down the current world order. We're talking major wars in Europe, maybe with Russia, plus civil wars popping up internally. In the United States, more civil strife and maybe new conflicts in South America. But the big one, the one that changes everything in this theory, is a war between the US and Iran. And the predicted outcome is the key. The US is forced to pull out of the Middle East, leaving a giant power vacuum.
So who fills that vacuum? Well, the theory says Israel does. And not only that, it supposedly gets all of America's best military hardware in the process. Jerusalem then becomes the world's one safe haven for money, AI, and weapons, essentially profiting by managing the global chaos it helped create. This concentration of power then leads to the rise of a single global leader, what many would call the Antichrist, and it all ends in that final biblical battle, the war of Gog and Magog. And so, we're back where we started. The theory, as its proponents would argue, has passed its own 3 tests of truth. It connects the past, explains the present, and predicts the future. So, where does that leave us? Is this just a grand, intricate conspiracy theory, a way to find order and meaning in a chaotic world? Or, as the source material claims, is it a genuine predictive model for where we're all headed? That's a question we will leave with you. Thanks for digging into this with us.